Welcome, everybody, to the first of our 2021 Spring Istanbul Talks series. We have two distinguished guests today, Erdem Erten and Evren Başbuğ. They'll discuss possible new venues for a creative collaboration between architectural theory and practice in Turkey through their curatorial proposal for the 2020 National Pavilion of Turkey at the Venice Biennale, which was shortlisted for the final. I'd like to welcome them to our talk and thank you, Erdem and Evren, for accepting our offer and being with us tonight.
Thank you.
I'll introduce them briefly to you. I'm sure they don't need any introduction for our audiences, but I'll give them a brief information nevertheless. And then I'll only briefly talk about the reasons, the motivation behind our extending our invitation to these distinguished speakers tonight, and why we find the topic important to be covered as the first talk in our series this semester. Erdem Erten is professor at the Department of Architecture at İzmir Institute of Technology, also known as İYTE. He received his Bachelor's of Architecture at METU and completed his PhD at MIT School of Architecture and Planning's History, Theory, and Criticism program. His research interests include the theorization of culture and its impact of modern architecture and urban design in the post-war period, architectural journalism, the problem of the avant-garde in architecture and romanticism, vernacular architecture, which is very much related to the theme today, and architectural historiography. He is the editor of Alternative Visions of Post-War Reconstruction, Creating the Modern Townscape, a book that was published, I think, by Routledge in 2015, and has published extensively in international academic journals. He is also currently the chairman of the executive board of 4T Design and Design History Society, based in Izmir. Evren Başbuğ is the founder and creative director of Studio Evren Başbuğ. He received his BArch at METU and MArch at Bilgi University in 2009. He has won over 20 awards, which includes 4 first prizes in national architectural competitions. He, along with many of his works, have been nominated or commended multiple times by national and international award programs, including the World Architectural Festival. Başbuğ was among the 14 young architects selected for the Young Architects Selection and Exhibition, GEMSS, organized by the Circle. In 2018, he was given the prestigious National Architecture Award in the Buildings and Public Space category with the Bostanlı Footbridge and Sunset Lounge project. He is currently teaching as a part-time studio instructor at TED University and Ankara Medipol Universities, and coordinator of Archipri in Turkey, and a member of the Architects Professional Committee in the Izmir Chamber of Commerce. So the title of this talk is, would like to read it again, Emergent Vernacularism's Architecture Scenarios of a Globalizing Presence. Now, why they're both here together? Because they collaborated, obviously, on a project together, on a proposal, but also because we find the use of the vernacular an important part of our discussion and practice. I think it has the potential to kind of challenge the binaries, the dualities we find in the literature, easily made between local and global and traditional and modern. It brings a nuanced understanding of those things. It connects to them in different ways. And I think it would be interesting for us to hear how it is employed in architecture and architectural theory, especially in the recent decades, and how it could be useful to sort of challenge these binaries that bound our imagination and debates in architectural history and theory. But also, when we think of the vernacular, I think Evren's projects are kind of very much related to this concept and how it is employed in architecture. I know many of his projects, and I use one of them every day. I live very close to the bridge. So they're very site specific. And he's working with the local municipality. So that is also, I mean, if we're going to talk about locality or vernacular practices, then I think it fits nicely into that category as well. And also his works are not very assertive, architecturally, that very much belong to the present and have that kind of anonymity that Erdem talks about in the proposal that he'll elaborate in a moment. And finally, as a third, I think, important point, that we're interested to hear the new venues. How is it going to be possible for the larger community of architects? And the collaboration between theory and practice, or theoreticians and practitioners. I know there is not a clear divide, and there are people definitely wearing both hats in different situations, but nevertheless, we keep talking about that divide and how can we overcome that and find subjects, topics, and areas of discussion where we could channel our energies and collaborative practices to create something new out of them. So again, without further ado, I'd like to leave the floor to Erdem and Evren. I think Evren is going to make a start, but I'll leave the arrangement to them as well. Welcome again, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kıvanç, thank you for the lovely introduction. And thank you all for being here this evening, listening to us. I think I'm gonna share the screen now. Is it okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oops, the full screen. Yeah. Okay, today I'm just going to make a brief introduction to our story with the Pavilion of Turkey for the 17th International Architecture Exhibition, La Biennale di Venezia, and leave the stage to Erdem. He's going to do the hard talk about our statement. He'll just construct a framework for our statement for you. Maybe later I will just interfere again for the design proposal, for the details of it. A little bit background information for those who are not familiar with the subject. As most of you know, established in 1895, La Biennale di Venezia has since been one of the most prestigious cultural institutions in the world. Turkey participated in the international art exhibition La Biennale di Venezia for the first time in 1991. And in 2014, with the initiation of the Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts, İKSV, Turkey obtained a long-term venue in Venice. You see the building here at the left. We actually have a space to use on the upper floor of that building. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the previous projects that took place at the Pavilion of Turkey. 2014, Places of Memory, 2016, Darzana, 2 arsenals, 1 vessel, and 2018, the Shift Vardiya. For the last 3 cycles, Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts issued an open call for architects to define the curatorial framework and to design the exhibition space itself. I mean, the procedure is simple. An independent jury reviews and shortlists 5 proposals among the ones that respond to this open call and request those teams to develop the idea in detail in a second stage. And then teams present their work to the jury. The jury selects 1 proposal to represent Turkey in the following exhibition. And the selected team begins work for the production of the exhibition. As most of you were, I was just a regular visitor to the Biennale in Venice previously. So how did our affiliation with this all begin? This was not something I've been thinking before Kıvanç's invitation for this presentation. I will try to post-conceptualize our interest in such a challenge now. Because, I mean, for our office, it seems so natural for us to participate in such a challenge. I mean, any challenge, to be more accurate. Oh, there's an open call, let's apply for it. I mean, our office actually works like that. For the ones familiar with our work as an office, we always tend to extend our scope of work beyond the conventions, find new challenges for us, explore different areas, and establish new partnerships all the time. We believe in the enjoyment and fulfillment of collaborative work. It's really sometimes hard to find a project in our portfolio which has a relatively short credit list. I mean, our projects have huge credit lists always. We always tend to seek for new ways of collaborating with other professionals and challenge ourselves with emerging new problems. I believe that this has a refreshing side to it, so we go on doing that. We most of the time expand our scope of work that we are handling so much that sometimes we have, I mean, hard time making it up again as a whole. But also, I believe that this has a lot of advantages in helping you see the world around you in a wider spectrum. This is an extreme example for our office. I'm just showing it to you. I like bringing this up whenever I can. Last year, we participated in a hackathon, which is a 2-day software development challenge. I mean, of course, we were the only team with a background with architecture. We have collaborated with our software engineer team members and developed a working mobile app demo, which allows you to earn points according to your choices of ecologically friendly ways of commuting in the city. We as an office are interested in design problems exceeding the conventional scope of work of architects, let's say. We have recently participated in 2 competitions for designing urban furnitures and urban lumières. These are examples of these work. Besides our oscillations moving around the boundaries of profession, I believe that our recent core work also somehow pushes the limits of the profession. I mean, not in terms of design quality or design approach, of course, but in terms of the relation we establish with the clients, using interesting funding schemes, definition of problems, and maybe unique collaboration processes. As I said, I told you all of this, I mean, to provide a background to understand our interest in such different challenges. So it seems completely normal to me that it all began as a casual lunchtime conversation with my close friend and business associate, Ceyhun Baskın, in June 2019. We were in Izmir for a business meeting. It was a hot sunny day and we were eating outside. The open call for the pavilion was announced a couple of weeks ago, and the deadline for proposals, I think, was a week away or so. So I remember asking this question to Ceyhun, maybe with another, not exactly like this, but I remember it as if I asked him, can you see it? I mean, something is changing in the architectural domain. It's also visible globally, but it's much more perceptible in the local scale. And we thought that it's not surprising also, which is started in the local scale. The change in the way architects establish their relationships with the clients, the new ways of professional collaborations, I mean, emerging funding schemes or construction methods, they are all evolving into something that is really new and interesting. that may not be the exact words, but I remember that we had a small talk about this, and then immediately try to find some examples to refer. For example, House of Chickens and Cabin on the Border by So was one of them. The work of Urban Tank and Nomad Mind were among those. Herkes için Mimarlık and Mimar Meclisi, the work of such associations are among the examples. I remember we were talking about Emergent Container Park by Atelier, Building Biology and Technology Institute, the works of theirs. We somehow related with Müze Salon by Argos and Bostanlı Footbridge and Sunset Lounge with this concept a little bit. And we somehow agreed on the validity of this statement, following the traces of these instances immediately, and started to think what to do with this premature idea. Actually, this was not even an idea at the time. It was just a feeling, maybe, that something was going on in the architectural domain. And we thought maybe this could evolve into a statement that we can propose it for the open call for the Pavilion of Turkey. So 4 years ago, a spectacular object was exhibited, as you all know. Darzana was a multi-layered object based on a connection idea between Venice and Istanbul. 2 years ago, the space was converted into an active working venue for students of architecture. The shift was focusing on the process, and it acted as an educational instrument, challenging the value of the Biennale, rather. So maybe we thought that, a statement on an emerging situation in the architectural domain, prioritizing the democratization of the practice may be a good concept for an exhibition, especially for a Biennale, which introduces this question as a general theme: how we will live together, if you remember the theme. So we immediately teamed up with Erdem, since Ceyhun and I don't have the intellectual background to academically formulate such a statement. So together we developed this idea into a mature exhibition concept and the design proposal at the end. So eventually our proposal wasn't selected by the jury. However, we believe that this is still a valid statement now. So we are open to discuss it with you later after Erdem's presentation. So I'm leaving the stage now to Erdem. Sorry, I think it was longer than I thought.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I think when Evren stops sharing his screen, I can share mine. I'd like to thank Kadir Has University and the Department of Architecture, which I have a group of very dear friends, not to say colleagues. And also would like to remember Sibel Hoca, who was once the head of the department, which is again a very beloved professor of mine from MIT. Just to add a little bit of background to that as well. This might sound like it started out of a casual conversation, and but of course it was something in the making, something that was bubbling. And Evren was very much into global circles. He was working around, going to all these awards, following them up. And I was very much preoccupied with the idea of the global and the local. That was one question, and I think in a way it quite productively came together. And I believe the title and the subtitle of the curatorial proposal will pretty much tell you how that works. Of course, my work on architectural historiography and the idea of the vernacular, how that emerged, what it has become had something to do with this discussion. So here we go. Hold on one second. All right, let me share this with you. Okay, are we fine? And I'll put it to full screen now. Do you see the screen clearly? Can you send me a thumbs up? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So what I'll do, I'll sometimes talk about the text of the proposal that we presented, and sometimes maybe improvise a little bit to keep this like a talk and not like reading the booklet itself. So, well, the idea is, of course, what challenges us today is globalization transforms everything, everywhere, in varying speeds, in various ways. It doesn't affect all of us the same speed, and there's a kind of clash of culture, and it produces different, let's say, results, right? So if we think of our architectural discourse, and if you compare it to the 1990s, I mean, we can say that theory and history traveled the world much slower than it did today. Okay, and the practice and the production of architecture, we can say that is being pulled into diverse directions. And I think it's a nightmare for historians and theoreticians in a way, because we had a simpler world to think about. We had a simpler arsenale to work with the kind of reality that we had in our hands, very much, directed by a kind of center, maybe. And now, I mean, we are at a point that we have the difficulty of coming up with an all-encompassing framework that will define the contemporary situation, and we're not at all proposing a kind of all-encompassing framework. So don't misunderstand for that. But that situation, that diagnosis, I think, is quite important for the situation that architecture finds itself today. So, I mean, in this situation, the center versus the periphery no longer applies to a digitized, cyber and cool world. I'm of course referring to the work that Polhas had done with reference to globalization. And architectural history and theory at the moment is cursed by the global. I mean, it's ill-equipped to deal with the colossal weight of architectures in this array. So what to do with all this production, how to talk about it, how to talk about the globe, how to talk about the history of the globe itself from the point of view of architecture is a major problem. So why emergent vernacularisms? Why are we coming up with this topic? Of course, you see the slash marks in the title: vernaculars, vernacularism, vernacularisms. Those are the kind of provoking, let's say, nuances, or let's say the points that we want to raise. Are these vernaculars? Are these vernacularisms? Again, we're putting forward a kind of provocative question rather than trying to answer it. So until the 1970s, architecture had been preoccupied by this historiographic dictum that separated architecture into two: architecture with a big A versus architecture with a small a. And nearly everything that encloses space on a scale sufficient for a human being to move in is a building, according to this. The term architecture applies only to buildings designed with a view to aesthetic appeal. This is Nikolaus Pevsner writing in 1942, dividing architecture into two, which I think has been a very powerful, let's say, theorization of how we see architecture, how we see buildings. So abandoned by architectural history's interest and disguised as anonymous, since then, vernacular architecture has been architecture's other, in a loose ahistorical grouping of what they call buildings. And this has become a kind of useful separation in supporting another binary opposition, that is the local versus the global. I mean, the vernacular almost always occupying the local, the global, or the international in the past. And of course, that brings forward a position where the local is almost always something to be taken care of under the threat of the global, and almost always imprisoned in discourses of identity. So I want to remind you again what the vernacular was, what it can be now, all right? And that's the question. That's one question that we ask. So vernacular architecture, as I told you, cannot be separated. It cannot be dissociated from architectural historiography. Emerged as a category by the end of the 19th century, and it's now consolidated as a research field in architectural academia. It was always understood as something, I'm reading here from Al-Sayed, native or unique to a specific place, produced without the need for important components or processes, and possibly built by the individuals who occupy it. As he and others argue, under the dynamics of global change, the vernacular cannot be expected to remain something constant. And the meaning of the concept needs to be re-evaluated under these changing circumstances. Probably many of you know the famous exhibition by Bernard Rudowski at the MoMA in 1964 and 65. Vernacular architecture was very much understood as architecture without architects, which wasn't completely true. But the strength of the exhibition, the popularity of the exhibition, and the book that followed, and of course the reaction against modern architecture that exhibition generated, took quite an important root in our psyches, let's say. As studies on vernacular architecture in the first half of the 20th century largely focused on the so-called clash between tradition and modernization, and almost always associated the vernacular with anonymity, nostalgia, and cultural identity. I mean, these were inseparable from the vernacular. So it was always seen as part of a disappearing heritage. It's to be identified, documented, categorized as historic, here I'm quoting, historic or traditional forms, plans, materials, and styles. I mean, of course, you'll remember the gigantic work of Sedat Hakkı Eldem and the Turkish house. You might find, I mean, in all these restoration departments about typologies of, vernaculars, studies made on vernaculars, almost, as the vernacular existed alongside with this, architecture with an A, big A, and the architecture being the architecture with a small a. And of course, after the 80s, maybe even earlier, the practice of architecture and building production has been heavily eclipsed by the commercial abuse of vernacular typologies. I mean, you would see it in Turkish tourism architecture, or, local images pasted onto buildings. So contemporary studies in humanities, however, emphasize, and if you look into the definition of tradition, if you want to understand what tradition might mean today, emphasize that tradition cannot be seen as something constant and ahistorical, but as a dynamic and processual nature. So what tradition? Where is that tradition? What time is this tradition? Are the questions that we keep constantly asking. Vernaculars involve creative processes through which people, as active agents, interpret past knowledge and experiences to face the challenges and demands of the present. For a globalizing world, I mean, that was probably our main issue. I mean, trying to understand, trying to position the vernacular. For a globalizing world becoming less and less connected to place due to an increased mobility of all things, human or non-human, to speak of vernaculars within a long durée becomes highly impossible. How to speak of a local tradition when there's not much that is local, and everything is, traveling the world. So what is changing? I mean, what is it that we think that is changing? What is it that led us to these questions? We believe that a major change is underway, and that architects, including many in Turkey, simply forego, they skip the debate that it's the global against the local, which presupposes a kind of stable, culturalism. And there's simply no value in being involved in the identity masquerade. And architects, I mean, no longer aiming for the superhero, or should we call it the star architect, nor putting on a fake localized identity. They reposition themselves to a new kind of anonymity and produce a variety of vernaculars independent of the conservative definition of the vernacular of a place, of a region as it used to be defined. Why? Because vernacular is always belongs to the now. It belongs to the present. That's where the present in the title also comes. We are in a professional world, split between a group of star offices or offices that want to be star offices, and unlikely minnows who can never, imagine to be those star offices that accept the impossibility to compete. We start seeing emergent practices of architecture with a small a that aim to redefine the professional, the practice, and the way it interacts with capital. We now witness architectures that speak in vernacular everyday languages. That is in the original dictionary definition of the word vernacular, because vernacular basically means daily language. I mean, it's not like a written language. It's not like an artistic language. It's the daily language that people use in a certain region. This is an everyday language, spoken and colloquial. It's nativity born on occasion, specific to the situation and to the time. That's the definition of the vernacular that we want to investigate with this exhibition. These vernaculars are neither characterized by their commercial availability nor aesthetic appeal or sense of nostalgia that might be attributed to them. So what are the scenarios? How did we come up with these scenarios of this globalizing present? Today, emergent anonymities are shaped in the dialogue between the architect and the client, where the client desires a designer figure for his or her quote-unquote anonymous building. The architect might simply find himself or herself in the position to design a new but anonymous artifact that challenges the category building. Sometimes the architect simply takes upon the role to be enabler of a building for which a budget may not even exist, or the budget needs to be sourced in unconventional ways that we not used to see with the professional office. In another scenario, the architect may be called upon a task where a client's body is almost impossible to define, or he or she finds himself or herself in a collaborative situation where the architect disappears as an author, as one among many contributors, neither leading nor following. Okay, so his role in the team is not necessarily a leader position. Educational curricula today promote work environments in which architectural design is quickly translated into building, where several construction strategies from conventional prefabrication to computerized processes are at play, where again, authorship is collectively owned. So what do we do with these, digitally printed objects where, like, let's say 15 students and a professor work together, and sometimes some of these actually end up being built as part of the city. So such scenarios or such questions, if you will, I mean, because these are questions also for us, are directly linked to the dynamics of globalization, where neoliberalism meets its nemesis in the rise of the demand for well-designed public spaces, within which architecture takes up a secondary role, where collectives rather than single-handed expertise take over decision-making, and corporate identities and master figures are challenged in unprecedented schemes of collaboration. Like, I mean, the whole Izmir Deniz project is a challenge. I mean, in one way or the other, and we can talk about this. So emergent vernacularisms legitimize themselves with a strong emphasis on the ecological impact of architecture, not necessarily via reliance on polished certification schemes of a suspect sustainability, but on their heavy dependence on locality and economic possibilities. So what did we do for the National Pavilion? We proposed an exhibition that would display these scenarios and products of such emergent vernacularisms. And be it language or architecture, the vernacular is characterized by being alive, being in use, being produced within a contemporaneous dialogue of mundane means. It rests upon the daily and the local. In this dialogue, architecture is not aloof, it's not authoritarian, and does not speak from a pulpit. This is from the exhibition text. Today, as Evren gave the example in the beginning, a simple chicken coop demands a proper design service given by an architect, right? So is the project by So. And when constructed, it might take its rightful place in architectural media as it was heavily publicized after. Now, a sunset weaving deck, like the one that Evren designed, which is not necessarily subject to attention, becomes an urban spectacle since public space has become a precious commodity to spend money on. An architect designs a retreat in the countryside, which depends on the meticulous execution of carpentry, which paves the way for a new relationship with locality, not necessarily confined within regionalist stereotypes. What is peculiar about these emergent vernaculars is that their anonymity is desired rather than constructed, and is not an ahistorical on post facto discursive reference. That's a bit heavy theoretical language, but forgive me for the indulgence in that. As we encounter the global moment, we question our roles as architects and see the possibility whether architecture can be produced, maybe not, and here I'm referring to William Morris, not for the people, by the people, and I think it's timely to discuss Morris again, but in the least for the people, with the people, and not necessarily, for the people, with the people. Emergent vernacularisms testify to this moment and the diversification of our roles, and not necessarily to a simple collection of projects. So it was not our intention, let's say, to promote a group of projects. It was about how the architect's role it changes, how the practice is changing, how the process is shaped in novel ways with reference to the global and the local. So we wanted to emphasize the processes and the scenarios that led to the production of various emergent vernacularisms, which are vernacular architecture with architects. So this was the group of scenarios. We had 7 scenarios that we grouped, let's say, the efforts of a number of I don't know how to even call them, like practices, groups, collectives, and they're all in this. And the thing is, the reason why we actually liked our proposal a lot was because this was about Turkey. I mean, this was the National Pavilion. We wanted to kind of refer to the present practices of architecture in Turkey, and we wanted to group all of this about how it was changing. And how Turkey actually connects to the global has a lot to do with the scenarios, with these scenarios, and with these practices. And I'll be very brief about all this. The first scenario, which we titled Solidarity First, was about architectures of solidarity, spatial justice and service, which looks at the processes and products by figures, groups, organizations, that prioritize solidarity and spatial justice and service to communities. Evren already mentioned a little bit, like Architecture for All, Düzce Umut Atölyesi, Hope Workshop, Solidarity Architecture, Plankton Project, Architects Assembly are the groups that we might put under this scenario. The second scenario, collective authors for collective spaces, where we witness collective authorship for indefinite publics, which would investigate collective and participatory design processes within which several actors take diverse roles in the production of design for the public. Sunset Lounge, Alay Bey Garden, Bostanlı Pavilion, Tasarım Araştırma Katılım, Urban Tank, Nomad Mind are part of these projects of the scenario. Let's say recycling in service, architectures of eco-sensitive recycling strategies based on local material stock, eyeing economic, social, and environmental sustainability. That was our third scenario. Emir Drahshan Architects, Mercan Container Park, number 8, Şişli by Anonim Istanbul. I mean, I think we could find more projects like these. One thing that I forgot to tell you is that we actually, after we were shortlisted, we sent a call to a group of people, to a large number of people, that with the summary of the proposal, and asked them how they would like to contribute to our diagnosis, how they would like to challenge it, and whether the examples that we have might be multiplied with more examples. So this was we even would like to do this part of a collective effort and include more voices in the ultimate exhibition. The fourth scenario, expanding the range. Architectures of unorthodox building typologies that question the province or range of an architect's production by turning to several examples like the House of Chickens, the Right to Idleness, etc. Scenario 5, no more local fakes. That was Ceyhun's idea. We wanted to kind of provoke the audience as well with these titles, and that was about architectures that engage locality without resorting to traditional vernacular cliches. We have the example on the screen by Nevzat Sayın in Gümüşhane, this cultural center that he worked together with the carpenters of the region, learned the typologies. But it's still, I mean, I don't know, maybe Nevzat Sayın would accept it, but you know, the star architect not necessarily producing a signature project and heavily giving responsibility to the local workforce in the creation of or in the production of the building. We can talk about Urla Bay Vineyard Vineyard Hotel by Sert Akbay, where he worked like a craftsman himself, together with craftsmen coming from Ağrı who had no idea about building in stone, but they learned the building production traditions of, or stone building, let's say masonry building traditions of Urla. And of course, there's Akçakoca Bey Mescid by Coop, which we can also talk about later in detail. The sixth scenario, collaborative pedagogies, which I think is very, very important and valuable, which would, you know, talk about pedagogies that prioritize collaboration, collective authorship, and making, which incorporate sensitivities to locality, craft, and environment. You can talk about the METU internship, Arch 190 internship program. MEF University, I think, has an important role in such a scenario. There's Tasarla and Yap Studiosu, Betonart Summer Schools, I think, are developing this attitude, and it's becoming very, very strong in the architectural landscape. And perishable shelters, that was our seventh scenario, which was looking into biodegradable architectures that prioritize the ephemerality rather than permanence of architecture for a sustainable future, as well as, of course, making, again, using the body. These are performative architectures as well. They're not necessarily a kind of design and build experiment. It's more like making on-site and performing with the body for the production of architectural space. Here I conclude my talk. Thanks for bearing with me. Evren can show you maybe a group of images about how the exhibition would look. We would have loved to win, but unfortunately it didn't happen. But of course, we have some images about how we understood this exhibition and how we imagined it within the Arsenale, and the design of the exhibition had nothing to do with the vernacular, in the sense that, it did not resort itself to these vernacular cliches in the design of the exhibition. That was also one idea that was embedded into the design. Thanks.
I've shared, but Erdem, can you stop the share?
Share.
You see the screen? So actually, the design of the exhibition is not so important. So what we did was just try to find the best way to tell the story of this. Tell the story of every instance that we selected. We have selected, I think, 10 projects which are included in these 7 scenarios. And we were proposing to document them in a way that takes the audience into, which is actually the main idea of the exhibition was a multiple moving images. Multiple films for 10 projects playing simultaneously in the same space. This is the general view of the space. As you know, our space in Venice is like 44 meters to 10 meters, and it has a height of approximately 5 meters. So we didn't propose any dividing elements. So as you see here, there are identical modules for every project that we want to include in the exhibition. Those modules come together to form this total space. So each module has a sitting area and has a huge screen which the movie is playing. And next to this screen, there's an ID case for each project. So this is the plan of the space. As you may have known, you enter here and you exit there, or vice versa. So you enter and exit this space at the middle of the long side, always. So this is a close-up. This is a section. You see, we use the space all the way to the whole width of it. This is an elevation of the wall, which has 5 projects.
Maybe I can add one little thing, that this was about, this was heavily about documenting these processes. So when you see these screens, of course these are still images that you're seeing. Don't think that we would be just showing photos and maybe models of these projects. It was more about the making. It was more about the process of their production. So we could understand what was going on about the projects, not like admiring how they looked, etc. This was the least important thing for us. It was more about telling their stories, telling the stories of the production, and the actors that were involved. From probably the least important actor to the most important actor. The collective that basically took part in the production of of these projects. So that was the more important thing for us.
Yes, thank you, Erdem. As you can see, there are no detailed drawings or just one model hanging down from the roof, and an explanatory text. And this, what you see as a still image, is a documentation, a movie, which focuses, as Erdem said, which focuses on the process, the actors, but not the final situation or final object, final artifact.
So it's not like Nevzat Sayın would be there, talking about his projects, etc. It would be more like how the whole thing took shape, with the craftsmen, with the people, and the architect as well. Of course, not denying or undermining the role of the architect, but the collaborative process that led to it. So, yeah. So,
well, this is a detail of a visual. I think that's all. We have a couple of renders, but I think that's all for us. Erdem?
Yeah, we're pretty much done with our presentation. We'll be very happy to answer any questions that you might have. But thanks again for giving us the opportunity to give this presentation.
Yeah, we find this really interesting because this is actually done for the International Exhibition of Architecture, but we really think that this is still a valid statement, and
hopefully we
not actively searching for, but looking for chances to promote this. And if that turns out to be an exhibition, we won't say no, yani, değil mi Erdem?
I mean, like we would like to develop the idea further. That's for sure. I mean, we would like to get the reactions to it in a way that it died away a little bit after this thing, because the foundation only promotes the winner, of course. But I think the 5 proposals that were presented in the final, I think were very good proposals, almost all of them, and this was one of them. Either the remaining 4, I think either of the remaining 4 might actually find a way. If they can find a way to be displayed, I think it will be worth it. I only know one of them with detail because the proposal was made by a friend of mine, but we didn't have the chance to see the other 3. So I think they deserve to be heard.
So thank you for listening. We can take questions, I think, if any.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. I have a question, but yes, I've located it again. But I'd like to reflect a little bit on. I've received one question so far, and just I forgot to mention this to our audience, that please feel free to, and you're welcome and encouraged to ask your questions through the chat box on YouTube. And do you mind, guys, by the way, unsharing your screen so that we can see it? I think ourselves, all of us, in a gallery view. That's for the audience as well. Thank you very much. So please type your questions on the YouTube channel. So I'll be delivering them to our speakers here. Now, for me, I mean, both of you, it's very interesting to see this, how you formulated and all this around the concept of the vernacular and sort of the contemporary use of the term rather than the cliches that are associated with it. So when you were talking about, Evren, about this kind of, you observed, kind of felt this something is changing in the architectural field and in the way things are done or shared maybe or practiced, or maybe offices were doing something else than they did maybe a decade ago, maybe the newer generation. And Erdem, you were saying that there's this kind of anonymity that is kind of linked to all this, and in terms of how this architecture with the big A, now, I mean, that is not what they're doing, but they're kind of sort of maybe retreating from that. I mean, the kind of conventional ways of putting the architect, the ego, the office, to, you know, whatever they do. But I think this anonymity is quite different than the anonymity, for instance, or the homogenization that the corporate architecture brings to cities, right? We're not talking about a formal anonymity as such, or at least, I mean, I guess my feeling is that these are smaller endeavors, but they're collaborative, they're more site-specific, they're sensitized to local attributes, cultures, or they feed from, they're fueled from where they're grounded, but they're not creating like these facades or forms that are also cliche or seen traditional or something either. So they have more specificity, I think, compared to the anonymous big architectures that we see around. Think of the Gulf, for instance, nowadays, and all those big scale projects that are sustainable and whatever, you know, on paper. So can you elaborate a little bit more on this concept, or both of you, perhaps how this practice is transformed? Yeah, thank you.
I think the word anonymous, the way you use it, is not the way I use it. I wouldn't say Gulf architecture or like what we see in Dubai or whatsoever. I mean, like, they are anonymous architectures. Like, that kind of anonymity, or that kind of reference to anonymity, was actually being used in the 1950s, especially with reference to what was called the international style then. And we would, you know, pretty much understand it like, you know, curtain walled office buildings, you know, mushrooming everywhere. I mean, if it's what you mean. The kind of anonymity that I think that we refer to with reference to vernacular is a different kind of anonymity. You know, there's no conscious effort to differentiate from its surroundings. I mean, likeness is not a problem. And locality is, in a way, is the initiator of all that kind of anonymity. But also, I mean, it's a problem. It's a historiographic problem, and because the architectures that we learn today from history as anonymous had their makers, had their dates, had their underlying conditions, but they were not differentiated with reference to their makers. So they might even have their, you know, architects with the big A. We don't even know, because we receive them through architectural historiography. But the vernacular, I mean, the apartment, for instance, the Turkish, you know, apartment block, is a vernacular form of architecture. If you look into the, you know, the period between the 60s to the 2000s, I mean, when, you know, consumer culture was still growing up in Turkey, you can't really talk about the apartment block with reference to architects. And Uğur Tanyeli actually has written about this, and he had written about this in the, I think in the 80s, even in the Chamber of Architects magazine. And, you know, and we should always think of the vernacular with reference to the conventional. So here we have architects, I mean, that are, I think, with the scenarios that we're putting forward, they're definitely trying to adjust themselves to the conventional, and the conventional form of the architectural office is changing. So I mean, I would think, you know, I don't know, maybe that's not what you're referring to, but the architects who did those buildings in the Gulf, that I'm familiar with only through books, and not those buildings as anonymous.
No, I mean, I meant I mean, of course, they're all-star architects and they're meant to be very different from whatever is around them. But at the end of the day, when we talk about the global city and all those discussions and centering around everything is becoming the same or very similar. I mean, as a totality, when you look at them, there's this city and that part of that city very similar to the other city in other corner of the world. Although, of course, they're designed by star architects.
But the thing the thing that what we wanted to say with emergent vernaculism is that it's almost always with reference to these vernaculars that we're talking about. They're almost always produced with reference to that kind of architecture. I mean, in differentiation from that kind of architecture. There's definitely a conscious intention. And the funny thing is the way many architectural historians talk about vernacular architectures is about unconscious production. There's almost always this word that gets used with reference to vernaculars. So yeah. Anyway.
Well, no, thank you. I have one question here, and it's a link to what I asked, in fact, and feel free, both of you, to respond. Sabri Gökmen from KHAS Architecture. We have seen interest into vernacularism in the field of architecture over the past years from Aravena's innovative work, where the temporal transformation of housing is granted to its inhabitants. He's referring to the social housing project that he made open source, obviously. To Mamani's interventions in Bolivia, where polychromy is accentuated to create heightened aesthetics of an emergent vernacularism, in quotation marks. In this perspective, do the examples mentioned within Turkey's vernacularism describe a unique ecology of novel aesthetics and ethics for architects in this part of the world? Or is it, I guess, part of this overall? I mean, do you see similarities with the global scene of what's happening here, or is it like really vernacular in that sense that to this country?
I think like vernacularity, if we are supposed to talk about such a thing, has to do with the locality, but I think that is definitely in touch with the global. That's the thing that I'm trying to, or we are trying to set up. And I think I would really like to see this project expanded. I was thinking of actually proposing this as part of a fellowship or research project, and try to see it in relation to what's happening around us all around the world. I don't think that's a coincidence. For instance, I don't know. Like I know some examples from Vietnam. I know some examples from Africa. I mean, if you look into the last 10, 15 years of the Aga Khan Award, or maybe the last 20 years, we see that attitude being rewarded in certain projects, not all projects, of course. But I think there is this is becoming more and more visible. But I don't know, like in terms of period, like in terms of the last 15 years, I think this might be a bit unique to, like, these examples might be specific to Turkey in that sense. If you look beyond the last 15 years or 20 years in Turkey, or I don't know, like I need to do more research on this. We can't talk about the same thing in Turkey. This might have an earlier lineage in the rest of the world. What I'm thinking is that globally, it's becoming more and more widespread.
Okay.
This kind of positioning, that's what I was trying to say. I mean, it's about a kind of positioning with reference to architecture and a kind of larger frame of reference.
Exactly, and I guess how offices are operating. So I was going to turn to Evren to...
Yeah, also, and the speed and pace is not equal in every part of the world. I remember we were discussing that where we should take the border. I mean, is it the borders of Turkey, or while we were digging the literature for these projects? I mean.
By the way, Evren, I mean, in terms of your practice, obviously you have an office, you're not alone and you're collaborating, but how do you feel I mean, you connected to the others around, in and around Turkey? I mean, do you think it's like there are more people around in the region? Are you aware of, for instance, in the Middle East or in the Balkans or Europe that are working in the same vein as your office, or do you kind of are in connection with people across borders in terms of the way you operate in projects like this? And I know this is a collaboration. I mean, with Erdem, obviously, we're talking about bridging theory and practice and the collaborations. But in terms of practices in and around Turkey through activism, for instance, which is the next question is about, I'll ask it separately. But how do you see this is going? Which directions I think this is going to take in terms of your practice and the practices like yours?
Well, first of all, I mean, one of our projects is in this selection, I mean, which we did for this exhibition. But I can't say that we completely, as an office, fall into this definition of what we call as, I mean, vernacular practices, or I don't know, because we also do, we also operate in the mainstream also most of the time, maybe not most of the time, but we operate in the mainstream. But sometimes we have some projects that would make us think that we fall into this categorization, and not also the office, but just the project maybe, or just that process. For the collaboration thing, we as an office are always open to collaborations, in, like I said in the presentation, with all kinds of professionals. And we also do it like really naturally. So we always expand our scope of work. So it most of the time we have some hard time doing that, because when you open a subject so much, and then it's really hard to finalize it in a way, because we are working on projects, we have deadlines, as you know. We sometimes use flexible deadlines, but really it can be sometimes hard to work with other people. For the collaboration with offices, I think you had another question. Not specifically, I would say. For example, I don't have a network of offices within the region or within a larger scope. But we of course follow architectural media. And about the last question you asked, there's, I think, one parameter for me to identify these projects, whether they fall into any of these scenarios or these categories or not. I realized that I spent so much time on these projects while browsing in the internet or just reading a magazine, because the projects or the processes or the offices or practices fall into any of these categories really excite me more and more. I mean, day by day.
So you see more commonalities, obviously, between them.
May I add a little thing? I mean,
sure.
Sorry for just a little thing to that question. These are scenarios. So we're not necessarily talking about offices that are consistently producing in a certain kind of manner. Yeah. So, for instance, we can't talk about Nevzat Sayın, being a vernacularist, with everything that he does, right? I mean, it's not possible. And Obaruhu is very different with reference to what they do. I don't know what next they're going to do. They produce certain projects which I thought was quite exciting. They might just give it up. I mean, it's So I think we're trying to kind of understand the attitude and how that attitude is led by external factors and how architects go about, or how people that produce certain kinds of buildings do that and why, right? That's the question we're more interested in. But it's not about classifying offices, doing a certain thing in a certain way. Not interested in that at all.
I mean, all the instances we selected as part of these scenarios are, as you can see, they are unique. Unique to the situation, unique to the location, and sometimes unique to the office even.
Ufuk was saying something.
Yes, Ufuk, go ahead, please.
Since I'm participating in the Zoom, I thought it would be easier to ask the question myself. So thank you very much for this very thoughtful presentation. It made me think about a lot of issues, and I kind of have a hard time formulating a question that is meaningful. But it made me think about a lot of different issues. So, I mean, how do when you say vernacular, I mean, why do you just say local or participatory and choose vernacular as a term? As if it's like, I mean, are you proposing a style like a traditional looking architecture or something like that? I mean, these are the questions that comes to my mind, first of all.
I mean, the reason I think why the term is so important, because I think it as a category, it has evolved into something that it's not, and we have started as what it's not. So vernacular, because of the historiography attached to it, I think because of the conventions, I think because of how we are used to it, has become something that's timeless, that's stylistic, that has some kind of morphological attribute that's attached to it, but it's actually not. For instance, like we like to talk about Safranbolu houses, right? We like to talk about Urla houses. We like to talk about Alaçatı houses. Nobody questions when exactly, within which period, under what circumstances these buildings have been built. We like to take it like that. Okay, this is the Alaçatı vernacular. Sorry, is there an evolution within that? Right? I mean, like if you, for instance, I remember again Uroja's book on housing. Right? He specifically questions like where the timber was coming from. In Istanbul, for instance, in the 19th century, most of the timber was coming from Russia. So what kind of locality are you talking about with reference to? I mean, you have to deconstruct that. But I mean, in order to talk about the vernacular, right, we can talk about the mundane, we can talk about the daily, we can talk about the process of production of the present. And I think it's even much more appropriate. So that's exactly what I'm trying to question, that kind of acknowledgement, okay? And I think that has a lot to do with the discipline and the discipline of restoration as well. Yeah, we have a ton of studies of typologies, for instance, that want to kind of unearth the essence of the vernacular. Right, of a certain kind of vernacular, whether it's in the plan type, like Sedat Hakkı Erdem did, whether it's in the material, etc., etc. So it has become, in that sense, ahistorical and timeless. So I want to kind of question that.
Okay.
And also uses such as like modern vernacular, for instance, that Tony King uses it, and vice versa. It's a term that is more, I guess, dynamic or inclusive or open to less binary oppositional kind of uses. I guess that's my impression.
I mean, when you look at the dictionary,
stylistic though. Is it also a stylistic term? Yeah, I mean, does it imply a style as well? Vernacular. Like without
as a term, it doesn't apply any style at all. It is astylistic.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about like I don't know, like at least in a historiographic sense, you don't talk about original vernacular with reference to style. as long as it doesn't have stylistic attributes.
But when you propose it as a, I feel like as if you are proposing it as a style.
No. It's more about. I think what we're trying to propose is an attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Is an attitude. Is something that I mean. It's an adjective that we might associate with a certain kind of production and an attitude that results in such a production. It's not about critical regionalism, for instance. I also like that, and I like the surprise that, like, when people see that ism, they are going to be, after that exciting new call for a style. But no, that's exactly the opposite that I think we would like to do.
Okay, we have only a few minutes left, so I'd like to take one or two more questions as we have time limited. Gül Kaçmaz is asking Erdem a question. Is the architect as the superhero being replaced by the architect as the activist? And Erdem perhaps too. I mean, she specifically said Erdem, but I'm extending it to both of you.
Hi to Gül, to Ireland. I mean, she's
I'm leaving hard questions to Erdem.
Gül and I were in the same class at METU. So anyway, I don't think so. But I hope so. No, but the thing is, I think the global is producing more and more awareness about architecture, not necessarily being about architecture per se. So we are constantly being pulled into trying to understand what we do better, or what the consequences of what we do better. So I think the star architect doesn't have a long life ahead of him or her, but of course, I don't like making such predictions. I mean, maybe it's my wish. It's better to say it's my wish that the star architect may not have a long life ahead of him or her. The activist architect, may he or she have a long life. That's what I would like to say. And may we have a profession that can actually promote such activism. It's looking quite difficult at the moment. So yeah, I mean, like, if Gül was expressing a wish, I definitely join her and share that wish in that question.
Thank you. And one last question I have here from Melike Sümertaş from KHAS. Thank you both for the great presentation. I have a question regarding the time frame of these emerging vernacularisms, keeping in mind the several earlier cases that Korea, I think, to my mind, such as the education at village institutes, köy enstitüleri, or the early examples of METU internship program, particularly from the 1960s. So although you have mentioned this as an emerging mode, do you see any traces far back in time? Or, I mean, what is the history of this emerging type of vernacularisms, if I am to rephrase it in my own way? And I'm also curious to hear about this.
I don't think I mean, since I wrote that part of the proposal, I don't think I'm making any argument for any kind of novelty here. Mm-hmm. I think we should definitely search for the genealogy. I mean, like, if you think of Makbi's rural studio, even I mean, we see those attitudes coming together, but I don't think that we have. I mean, maybe I'm making a bold claim here, but I don't think we have such a rich moment in time. He's coexisted in such a way. I think that is what
of exciting. And that's something to be promoted. That richness needs to be promoted, and that richness needs to be enjoyed by the profession. That richness needs to be made more. The public should be made more aware of such. That might be the question. That might be the answer that I can give. No, of course not. Of course not. I mean, the functional tradition argument of the architecture review. I can go as far back as the 30s for the call for a vernacular. I mean, it changes its shape, and we can't talk about the historicity of the call for a vernacular otherwise. But the call for the vernacular today is much more different than the call for a vernacular like Jim Richards and Pevsner did during the 40s. Or Sybil Moholy-Nagy did when she was researching the United States for a kind of vernacular, American vernacular, during the 50s when she wrote that book. And it's very different than the kind of vernacular that Rudowski talked about within the confines of the MoMA, I would say. And his take on the vernacular was very, very different. But what we can learn from that history is still very, very valuable. The way it can change the present is even more valuable.
I think these would be the very great concluding remarks of today's talk and discussion. Thank you both for attending and giving us this enlightening talk and presentation. We've enjoyed, I think, all of us, all the material you've shared with us and all the debate we had together. And we'd like to see you soon, hopefully, in another platform. And we would like, definitely would like to see the continuation of this collaboration among you, both of you, and this project in particular in another occasion, I guess. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kıvanç.
Thank you.
Good to see you always.
It was a great pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching.